Well, hello everyone. This is Al Fadi, and a mega welcome to all of you. I am so excited to have this live stream for many reasons. One is to see you and to interact with you. I've missed you folks. I haven't been able to do my usual live stream, but for obvious reasons, we're in studios, me and Dr. J, recording a lot of exciting videos, and we will share about that towards the end of this particular live stream. But this live stream will be the usual 1 hour in length, divided into two parts. First 25 minutes or so will be part one. The second 25 minutes or so will be part two. And the reason why I do this, because it is part of our radio called Let Us Reason. With that in mind, I want to welcome you, of course, to our podcast, Let Us Reason. And now the clock will start ticking. And we have about 24 to 25 minutes, give or take, for this particular part. And with us here in studio, our dear brother, Dr. J. Smith, who is sitting next to me, but also joining us remotely or virtually, a dear also brother and a friend, Mel, who always comes here to share some amazing discoveries based on his research. Today's topic is no different. We are going to continue with these revelations that are concerning the history of Islam, the origin of Islam, some of its rituals, even its possible original location for some of its main sites. Today we're going to talk about something called the Masjid Al Haram, which represents the Islamic holy site. Today, when you say that word, Al Masjid Al Haram, Muslims think of Mecca and think of the Kaaba and think of that big holy mosque area in there. And there are a number of rituals that will be conducted in there, whether you're doing the minor pilgrimage or the major pilgrimage. There is the Black Stone. There is also other places in there that you perform prayers at. There are two rocks that you do a ritual running between them, known as Safa and Marwa. There is also the well of Zamzam. But believe it or not, our brother Mel today will make his case that actually the original site for a Masjid al-Haram was in Jerusalem, and along that notion, we are going to explore the possibility of Safa and Marwa being there in Jerusalem initially, and even the Zamzam well. With that in mind, I want to welcome Dr. J, of course, for being here with us, and want to welcome Brother Mel. Mel, thank you so much. You always come up with these amazing discoveries for us, anywhere from the origin of Muhammad now to the origin of some of these rituals, and even the original site for this sacred mosque.
Hi, Al Fadi. It's great to be back. I keep working away, trying to uncover the truth of the origins of Islam. And today I'm offering a new hypothesis, and it's a kind of a standalone hypothesis. I would, first of all, like to draw our attention to the following gospel, which is a kind of a good way of understanding our work. It's a familiar story of Jesus healing the blind man. And when he healed him, the man looked up and said, "I can see people, but they look like trees walking." And then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he looked intently, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And I think that's a great metaphor for our work. At first, we see things in low resolution, and then we gradually see things more clear as we find additional pieces of information.
Wonderful.
And I would also kind of ask Muslims to be willing to open their eyes and see the facts as well, and consider new possibilities as well.
Yes, that's a great analogy. Thank you so much for bringing that up. Jay, I want to ask you this question. Did you know anything? I know you've done a lot of research, and we've been talking about a lot of new discoveries. Did you know anything about the possibility of the Hajj being even in Jerusalem, not necessarily in Petra, for instance?
No, and this is why I'm just sitting at the edge of my seat, because what I love about Mel, he really delves into these new areas, and he puts them up as white papers. We take them, we look at them, and we try to assess them. We try to see if the evidence fits. In this case, this is all brand new. We've just done a whole series of talks on Mecca itself. We've just done a whole series of talks on the Hajj and the 5 places of the Hajj. Now, Mel's going to introduce yet another category, another possibility that predates Mecca, that predates Petra, that is even before that. And that's why I love this kind of work, because we're pushing the boundaries. And it's people like Mel and his team. He has quite a few in his team around the world that are working with him, that are unpacking it. Mel is the one that puts his face on the camera and actually puts it out there, but he's also doing the research on his own. So here we go. Let's go and see, what does he have concerning this Masjid Al Haram, and he's going to talk about Safa and Marwa and even the Zamzam well. Well, those are three of the categories that we've been looking at. They're in Mecca. He's going to say no, they actually predate not only Petra, possibly even back earlier than that to Jerusalem.
Amen. So again, I want to welcome everyone who's watching this live stream. This is part of also our radio podcast, Let Us Reason. So I welcome also our listeners. This is 2 parts. So you'll listen to the pod stream right now, and next week we'll have part 2. If you're watching it live right now with us in studio, we have 2 parts, so please be patient with us as we stop the first part and continue with our thoughts. Mel, I'll turn it over to you then. You have some slides you want to walk us through.
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to acknowledge the work of other people on whose work I've built upon, particularly Paul Ellis, Edward Marie Galais, Odin, Colin from Islam Critiqued, AJ Juice, Murad, and other work that I've done as well previously.
And I think we also need to add Joe. I know that Joe has been also working on this very material as well. In fact, you're going to see that Mel and Joe agree on this point.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, wonderful names and wonderful people. Thank you so much for sharing this endorsement of their work.
Okay, so the standard Islamic narrative says the following, that the Masjid Al Haram, the Hajj, Safa and Mecca are in the Hijaz, and we're only ever in the Hijaz. That's what we've been told all along, okay? According to AJ Juice, his paper, Surah 2, Many Qiblas, he says the Quran neither commands a change from Jerusalem nor to Mecca, but instead to Al Haram in present-day Israel. And that's an important point. The idea that it commands a change from Jerusalem does not exist in the Quranic text itself. And the question is, where did we get that idea from? The Sin proposes it, I would suggest, to cover for what was obvious to many in the 8th century. There used to be a Hajj to Jerusalem, promoted by Caliph Abdul al-Malik, and today I will be giving you some of the evidence for that case. And as you can see here, this is Surah 2. I'm not going to read it through, but as you can see, there's no reference to Jerusalem there. Where did they get the idea that there was a Qibla towards Jerusalem to begin with? So there's obviously something behind all of that, where it comes from. So the following is from Paul Ellis' work, and he basically asked the question, what does the Quran say about the Al-Masjid Al Haram, the forbidden place of prostration? So it's referred to as the house. It's also referred to my house, and it's interesting that it says my, as we shall see, it was Umar who originally built the masjid on the Temple Mount. And we have this from Murad, which is a correspondence between Emperor Leo III and Umar II, not to be confused with Umar I. He says, it was Umar, Abu Turab, and Salman, the Persian, who composed that your Purkan, which is the Quran, even though the rumor has got around among you that God sent it down from the heavens. So he kind of suggests that Umar was one of the key individuals behind what became the Quran. In the early days, it was referred to as the Purkan, which I think refers to salvation. Now, another idea about the masjid is the station of Abraham. So that would suggest this is a place where Abraham has been. The ancient house, the sacred house, the Kaaba, the cube, the first house created for mankind at Baca. When Abraham and Ishmael were raising the foundations of the house is also another concept. Abraham says, Lord, I've settled some of my progeny in a valley without progeny in thy sacred house, or by thy sacred house. Obviously, that suggests that Israel, really, because that's where he settled his people. It's a pilgrimage destination. And in the Quran it says, do not shave your heads until the offering reaches the place of sacrifice. The new moon is a marker for the Hajj, and we know that it was the Babylonians who for 800 years did astronomical observations of the new moon. So that would suggest a connection there with the north again. Interestingly, he says there's no harm in the rituals of Safa and Marwa. Another one, and remember, when we assigned for Abraham the place of the house, ascribe unto me no partners, and purify my house for those who circumambulate it, and those who stand, and those who bow and prostrate. Okay, so we see quite a few things with that. Now, there's problems with Mecca fulfilling these ideas.
So you're using the Quran now to show the description of the Masjid Al Haram from the Quran.
That's right. Yeah. So Muslims assume that the Quran is referring to Mecca, but there are problems, and both of you have raised a lot of these problems before, and this will be no surprise to you. There's no sign of Mecca's existence before the year 700. That's a major problem. So how can it be the ancient house if it wasn't around until the 8th century? That's a big problem. Why would Hagar and Ishmael go 600 miles from Canaan to an arid desert 600 miles south, i.e. Mecca in the Hijaz? The Bible clearly says that Abraham sent Hagar out just south of Beersheba, which is the southern part of Israel. So how can that possibly make sense? There's no biblical link between the places of Safa and Marwa and the story of Hagar and Ishmael looking for water in the desert. Islam has put these two things together. Why? How did that happen? Because the Bible doesn't mention these places in connection with that. Safa and Marwa in Mecca are not hills. They're actually little boulders. They're just rocks jutting out from the ground. That's all they were. Bakka and Makkah are completely different words. People often overlook that. And if we then look at the reasons why I believe that the Masjid Al Haram is the masjid on the Temple Mount, here's reason number one in terms of the link with Abraham. So if we look at Genesis 22, Genesis refers to Abraham building an altar on Mount Moriah to sacrifice Isaac upon. Then God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. Let me just try that again. When they reached the place God had told them about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. Mm-hmm. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Now, this is a little aside, but the letter B and the word al-Bayt are linked. Originally, there was a hieroglyphic of a house, and then it became this ancient Semitic form, and then eventually became the Arabic letter Ba. And what's interesting is that it looks very much in terms of its shape like an altar that's found in Egypt. So perhaps there is an ancient link between the idea of a house and an altar. So this is a little aside, just a suggestion. Now, another idea. It is where Solomon built the first temple. Then Solomon began to build the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem on Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David. It was on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite, probably saying that wrong, the place provided by David. And we can see the shape of it there on the right-hand side. Now, if we look a little bit closer, and we're on to reason 2, the Kaaba is a cube. If you think about the Ark of the Covenant, it was kept in the Holy of Holies, which was a cubic room. God's presence, the Shekinah, was believed to be there. Now, you can see they used to have a tent, which was rectangular in shape, but one end of it was a cube. Mm-hmm. And when Jesus died, the curtains in the temple tore in two. That symbolized the idea that the gap between God and humanity was taken away. But I don't know if many people realize that the Holy of Holies was in a cube form. So that's significant. When Solomon built the first temple, it says in Chronicles, the portico at the front of the temple was 20 cubits long across the width of the building and 20 cubits high. Now, obviously, that isn't quite a cube there because we need another dimension. But if we look at Kings, we see a description which says it's 20 cubits long, 20 wide, and 20 high. Now, in my book, that's a cube. Does any of you want to jump in on that?
No, I just wanted to, basically emphasize that everything you're sharing here with us kind of makes sense in terms of shapes, locations, references, So I can see that you are trying to tie these knots together right now.
Okay. So reason 3 is to do with the Hajj itself, the pilgrimage. So according to Deuteronomy 16, 3 times a year, all your men must appear before the Lord your God at the place he will choose, at the festival of unleavened bread, the festival of weeks, and the festival of tabernacles. No one should appear before the Lord empty-handed. Each of you must bring a gift in proportion to the way the Lord your God has blessed you. And notice the names of these festivals. Hag HaKazir, Hag HaShavuot, Hag HaSukkot. And also, notice in Exodus, it involved sacrifice of goat, which is very similar to Eid al-Adha. If we look at the word Hajj, it is a clear Arabic borrowing from the Hebrew Hag. The G in Hebrew turned into a J in Arabic. And according to Odin Lafontaine, there's no logical connection to the Arabic etymology, which is HJJ, to argue. A person who makes the pilgrimage is called a Hagag, which, of course, if you turn that into Arabic, would be Hajjaj, which I'm sure you're familiar with someone called Al-Hajjaj.
That's right.
So that's interesting.
Ibn Yusuf yeah.
It suggests a link there. And it's interesting that all 3 of these hags or hajjas, which were made by Jews, were to the Temple Mount. So that would suggest that originally this hajj was to the Temple Mount. So that's, I think, a strong argument. Now, in addition to that, if we focus on the Feast of Weeks, and this blew me away when I first read this, the Mishnah Sukkah 4:5 says that they are to circle the temple 7 times on the 7th day, which is exactly what is done around the Kaaba.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So that's more than just a coincidence. And then reason 4, the house of God. The Bible refers to the temple frequently as the house of God. That would be no surprise to you. Here are some examples. One particular famous one, as you'll know, is Jesus saying, "My house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers." Reason 5 is to do with Baka. Baka is referred to in Psalm 84. And if you look at the passage there, you will see courts, your altar, pilgrimage. These are all connected to the temple. And so Baka, the Valley of Baka, is symbolic of the pilgrimage to Jerusalem.
And here I wanna make reference to what me and Jay raised a couple of times in the past, that Mecca is mentioned twice in the Quran, allegedly. But one time, really, it's spelled correctly with a meme, Mecca, whereas the second time it's called Becca. And I grew up in there. We never called it Becca. We understood that that's a reference to Mecca, but why would it be called Becca? Long and behold, now we're looking north, and there is the Becca Valley, or the Valley of Becca. Is it a coincidence? I mean, is everything pointing north now? I mean, is it a coincidence? That's the...
and for those of you who want to know where Becca Valley is, just look on a map. It's in what is today Lebanon. So that is, none of that. We have 3 references to Becca. It's not just that valley. We have other ones that also place another Becca down in the Sinai. But getting back to what you were saying, this is exciting stuff, Mel. Go ahead. I'm entranced.
Yeah, we have about 5 minutes left for this part, Mel, just to give you an idea.
Okay. Let's go on. So another reason is circumambulation. The Dome of the Rock was designed purposefully to be circumambulated. You can see the figure of a person walking around the center. And they put the inscriptions there in the Dome of the Rock for those who walked around. So that's obvious that it's meant for that. Reason 7. So this is Marwa and Safa in Mecca today, and the Kaaba next to it. And they circumambulated between the two. Okay, but Safa and Marwa in Mecca have no history prior to the 8th century and no biblical support for their location there. And it's interesting that, if you were to go there, you can see that these are not hills. These are just boulders, as you can see from the pictures. They're rocky outcrops at most.
I've been there.
Now, if we look at it,
trust me.
Yeah. If we look at a map of Jerusalem, okay, so you have the Mount of Olives where Jesus prayed before he died. We have the Temple Mount, and look what we have here. Mount Moriah, in Arabic, that's Marwa. So there we have Marwa. So that's at least 2,000 years old, probably 2,500 years old, that name. And then across over here, you have Mount Scobus, and we have a reference from Josephus, which is 2,000 years old, and it was also called Mount Safa. So there you have Marwa and Safa.
I love this.
There
Mel. This is so exciting. What you're saying is these are deformations of the words that we now were then incorporated into what we have in Petra, then incorporated once again as facsimiles in Mecca in the 8th century. This is great. Thanks.
Yes, and my question to my viewers now, if I see some Muslims watching, is it a coincidence really that you have a mount called Marwa and a mount called Safa right there in Jerusalem? Is it a coincidence? I mean, I can go on preaching about this right now, why Satan would take things and distort it and try to give you the impression that you're doing something that is religious, when in fact is just a distortion of facts that will point to the real Savior, our Lord.
Can we just also say one more point to the Muslims who are talking, Muhammad Malik and others? You are saying that we're just making this up. Did you notice what Mel is doing? He is actually using historical evidence. He's actually quoting from the very text. Josephus is from the 2nd century. So what I want the Muslims to do is, if they believe there was a Safa and Marwa in Mecca, show me from the 7th century, at least from the 7th century, because you're saying the Safa and Marwa go back way before the 7th century. Prove it. Don't just sit there and bellyache at us, and don't just sit there and yell at us. Give us the evidence, and do not waste our time with 9th and 10th century material. We want it from the 7th century or earlier. I leave it up to you, because all you're going to do is bellyache and call us liars. At least Mel has the evidence. He is quoting historical evidence. I want you to do the same.
You're asking him to do too much, Jay. Mel, if you can take maybe 1.5 more minutes to wrap this part.
Let me just wrap it up here quickly. So the Quran doesn't mention Jehoshaphat, which is the Kedron Valley, but what it does mention is the Valley of Gehenna, which is Jahannam, 77 times, or an alternative is Jaheen, 101 times. And where is that? Look at the map. So there is the Kidron Valley there. Here's Hinnom, which is mentioned 101 times in the Quran. So that's hugely significant. And Mecca is only mentioned once. So which is the more important place, this place or Mecca?
Man, and Mel, in the last minute alone, you did so much damage. I think a lot of shows can build upon it.
You're going so fast, we're going to have to unpack this a bit more, Mel. But God bless you. Thanks for what you're bringing up here. This just whets my appetite. I hope it's whetting all your appetites as well. Listen to what he's saying. This is a white paper. He's putting it out there. We're now going to start discussing it.
Yes. Well, Mel, what should people expect in the second part? What are you going to cover?
Well, we're going to develop this a little bit further. We're going to look at the story of how the masjid was built on the Temple Mount, and it all points to it being the original location of the Hajj. So we're going to see lots of evidence connecting Abd al-Malik with the Hajj in Jerusalem. So that's coming up next.
Yep. God bless you, brother. And to those who are watching us right now, we are wrapping up part 2 of our live stream and also our podcast, Let Us Reason. If you're listening to it, next week going to be even more exciting. What we have done so far with our brother Mel here joining us virtually is to prove that some of the Islamic rituals that are known today in Mecca, part of a pilgrimage, for instance, or the so-called sacred mosque and Masjid Al Haram in Mecca, it appears that those terminologies actually have their origin in Jerusalem. And it's no coincidence then that we have a mount called Mount Jabal Marwa and then Jabal Safa, where we have Safa and Marwa in Mecca. No surprise. What a coincidence that you have these names right there. And now we're going to talk about also the act of pilgrimage itself, which he alluded to, that the 3 festivals that are mentioned in the Bible, they start with the word Hajj, and from there you have the reference to Hajj, and possibly that's a distortion of where those pilgrims were done initially, and now it's been stolen and applied to another location, something that, of course, Satan is a master deceiver when it comes to doing these manipulations. Why? Because I want you, my Muslim friends, to do your homework, do your research, investigate the facts that we're sharing with you. We care for your eternal life and for your security, and we care for your soul. You do your homework. You can really pretend that we're lying to you. That's fine. It's not going to change the facts that Islam is not going to offer you anything of substance. Everything so far we've talked about the history of Islam has been debunked to prove to you that there is no such thing as 7th century Islam. There is no 7th century book. There is no 7th century man. There is no 7th century place. And the list can go on and on and on. I want to thank both of you for being here with me. Hang tight. We're going to do part 2 shortly. Thank you, everyone, for watching this. This is the conclusion of part 1. And thank you to our podcast, Let Us Reason listeners. We are finishing this podcast. And next week, we will continue with part 2. All right, everyone, let's start now part 2. We are still in studios doing this live stream with our brother Mel, who is joining us virtually, doing this amazing research about the origin or the possible origin of the so-called sacred mosque and Masjid Al Haram in Mecca, and how that ties into Jerusalem many years earlier. And at the same time, one of a particular ritual called the Safa and Marwa, where you run between 2 mountains, allegedly. Of course, in Mecca, it's not mountains, it's just pieces of rock protruding out of the ground. And the story is that when Hagar left Abraham, she was wandered into the desert, somehow made it all the way down to Mecca, was looking for water, and she was running between these 2 mountains. Every time she would see a mirage, she thinks there is water for her son Ishmael, she would run, and she did that 7 times. And then that's where the ritual originated from. Other stories will say that these 2 mountains represented 2 people who committed act of adultery, I should say, in that sacred place, and God punished them and turned them into pillars of rock. Whatever story you believe, it's all summed up with this one Greek word that I learned when I went to seminary, baloney. That's what it is. All right, my brother, I'll turn it over to you. Continue now with your assessment and the research findings.
Okay, so we're going to get quite apocalyptic for a moment. If we look at the map where Mount Moriah is, the edge of it there, if I can point the cursor, the eastern gate is here. This is the place where both Muslims, Christians, and Jews believe that the Messiah...
We don't see the map. Can you put the map up?
I think they're seeing it in the studio right now, I believe.
We don't see it on the screen yet.
Have we got the slide up?
All we can see is you right now.
Okay. Just let me know when you can see the map. Anyways,
keep talking. They'll the engineers will get it up when it's ready.
Okay. So basically, the Eastern Gate is the place where particularly Muslims believe that the Antichrist will pass through. And in the 9th century, they closed that off. And in the 11th and 12th century, the Crusaders opened it up again. But the Ottomans, to make sure that the Antichrist would not pass through there, they actually put a graveyard there. So this valley here, the Kedron Valley, so this Kedron Valley is believed in Islamic tradition to be the place of the apocalypse. So one of the most important places you can imagine. So here is some example of quotations from Islamic tradition, just to give you an idea. So the Rock of Jerusalem is one of the rocks of paradise. We find in the Torah that God said to the Rock of Jerusalem, "You are my lowest throne, and from you I ascended into heaven, and below you the earth is extended, and all the water that flows from the top of the mountains comes from below you." If we look at this, Jerusalem is a land which Allah has chosen from among the other lands, so highly important. God will destroy Gog and Magog in Jerusalem. So what I'm going to suggest to you is that originally this was an important location. They did a Hajj between both of these hills, and they were going essentially through the Valley of the Apocalypse. And this is the location where they believed the Messiah would return. So highly significant for them. And they even said that the gathering, the resurrection of the dead will take place in Jerusalem. So how are we doing so far? So it's a forbidden place. Oh, yeah.
No, I'm sorry. I thought you were asking me to respond to that. So go ahead.
Oh, no. Okay, so the forbidden place of prostration, yes. It's the inner sanctuary forbidden to Gentiles, and the Arabs were blocked by Jews in 614, so that fits the place. God's house. We saw that the temple is often called God's house. It's a cube. The Holy of Holies was cubic. The first house at Becca, well, we can see that that is from Psalm 84. Foundations raised by Abraham and Ishmael. Well, we see that the temple was built on Mount Moriah, where Abraham built an altar to sacrifice Isaac. Abraham settled his progeny nearby. Jerusalem is the capital of the Jewish nation, which obviously is where the progeny of Abraham is from. The Hajj pilgrimage destination. The 3 Hajj or Hajj feasts were celebrated at the temple. Animal sacrifice. Animal sacrifice at Passover, modern Hajj, finishes with Eid al-Adha, exactly like it was done at the temple. Circumambulation, well, we saw that between both those hills. And Marwa and Safa are located in Jerusalem. Now, we're going to look at the actual, what we can verifiably say was the building of the masjid. So Umar, according to some sources, entered Jerusalem in either 636 or 637. Okay. What is this building on the Temple Mount? Prior to the Dome of the Rock being built in the 690s, the Saracens had built another structure, and this is incredibly important. I'll just cut to the main thing here. It says that the godless Saracens entered the holy city of Christ our Lord, Jerusalem, with the permission of God in punishment for our negligence, which is considerable, and immediately proceeded in haste to the place which is called the capital. They took with them men, some by force, others by their own will, in order to clean that place and build that cursed thing, intended for their prayer, which they call a masjid. Okay? Sophronius excommunicated an archdeacon called John, a skilled marble worker who did work on this building for pay. Okay? And again, the monk Anastasius of Sinai informs us that he had witnessed clearing work being undertaken on the Temple Mount in 660. Now, it's interesting that on Friday, the 7th of June, 659, there was a violent earthquake in Palestine and many places were collapsed. This is from Robert Hoyland. Very likely the Mosque of Umar was one of the edifices affected, and it was therefore incumbent upon Muawiyah to have the structure rebuilt. That both Umar and Muawiyah undertook building projects on the Temple Mount is confirmed by certain of our sources. So that's emphasized the fact that this was the masjid, and this was the most important place for them. And then what's interesting, a pilgrim visited in 670, and French bishop basically called Earl Culf, who had been on pilgrimage to Jerusalem, got shipwrecked off the coast of Britain, and his account was recorded in Adomnan's writings, who was an Irish monk in 700 AD at Iona, which is in Scotland. And he says, in that famous place where once stood the magnificently constructed temple near the eastern wall, the Saracens now frequent a rectangular house of prayer, which they have built in a crude manner, constructing it with raised planks and large beams over some remains of ruins. This house can, as it is said, accommodate at least 3,000 people. The way that they built this is very similar to the way that the Jews built the original place of worship, the tabernacle, centuries before. Okay, so it's about, I reckon it's about the size of an American football pitch to accommodate 3,000 people. Now, next, there's a mixture of direct evidence and circumstantial evidence for Jerusalem being the focus of an Abd al-Malik sponsored Hajj. So there are a number of milestones from different directions around Jerusalem. You can read this yourselves, which were all seem to be directed towards Jerusalem. There's one particular quote from Damascus to this milestone, there are 109 miles. Okay, so this is circumstantial evidence. It would fit with the idea of a Hajj to Jerusalem. Another milestone says, the servant of God, Abd al-Malik, commander of the faithful, ordered the straightening of this mountain road, and it's dated to either 693 or 702. Part of it got knocked off, and that's why we don't know which it is. But here's the direct evidence. This is the bit that should excite you. The link between the Hajj and Abd al-Malik's Safa and Marwa is further strengthened by the following papyrus, written by none other than his nephew Sal bin Abdul al-Aziz in Egypt, to a governor who is encouraging to take part in it, and it's dated between 707 and 717. Okay? So I won't read it all, you can read it yourselves, but the key bit there is, I have mentioned the Hajj, the commander of the believers has proclaimed it to the people, and he has exhorted them to it. Now, we can eliminate Walid being the person he's referring to, because There is another rock inscription which is dated to 701, 702, again referring to the Hajj. So that would mean that it's most likely that it's Abd al-Malik's Hajj that is being referred to. And if we look at the map, let me just go back a second. It makes sense for it to be Jerusalem. If we take a trip from Egypt to Israel, that's a reasonable journey on camels. Your man says to the governor, go out with me with my riding camels and do not oblige yourself to anything besides the rental costs of a camel. Okay? I would suggest that it's very unlikely that they're going all the way down to Hijaz. That would be an incredibly long journey for them to be taken on camels.
It's about 600 miles.
Yeah. Now, we also have the Masjid Al Haram inscription, which is obviously dated 697, 698. We're not 100% sure where it's referring to. Okay. And because it's northwest of Taif, we could assume it's Mecca, but we don't know for certain. But the dating is interesting. And it says this was written in the year, the Masjid Al Haram was built in the year 78, the 78th year. Okay. So it's circumstantial. So we have a problem. The inscription in the Dome of the Rock says it was built in the year 72, and this one says 78. I would suggest a possible anomaly is, do we count the foundation or the completion date as the year it was built? That might actually accommodate both of those different dates. If we take the example of the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, the building of that was started in 1882, still not complete. So when they do finish it, which date are they going to say was built? Are they going to say 1882 or are they going to say whatever, 2050? So that's possibly a solution to the anomaly there. If we are open to the idea that actually that rock inscription might be referring to the masjid in Jerusalem and not in Mecca.
Yeah. Now, where was rock?
And then.
Where was that rock inscription found?
Taif. Taif is just southeast of
Taif.
Just southeast of Mecca.
Yeah, I see it now. It's in Taif, yeah.
Okay. Now, what's also interesting, if we look at the monikers of the two key individuals, Abd al-Malik's name, the full name is Ibn Marwan, which could mean son of Moriah, son of the Temple Mount. And of course, al-Hajjaj, it could be a reference to the fact that he was someone involved in organizing the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, because the word Hagag was specifically a pilgrim to Jerusalem. So that's significant just in the name itself. So if we've got time for one more, I don't know if you know Columbo.
Yes, he's
just
always,
one more thing.
This is usually the crowning achievement whenever he says that. Go ahead.
What about the Zamzam well? Okay, this is the clincher, I think. So the word Zimzum in Hebrew, according to Leon Peretz, relates to the sound the water makes, i.e. the gurgling of water. He told me about that literally about a year ago, and it's stuck it in the back of my mind. And so the Zamzam well is a well that makes a noise. That makes significant sense. And then I came across this source only about a week ago. It's from 570 AD. A man from Italy made a pilgrimage to the Holy Land and left a written account in Latin. So this is it. This is really significant. So he goes to the Dome of, not the Dome of the Rock, sorry, the Temple Mount, at the location where the Dome of the Rock was built, okay, later. So this is 50 years before Umar entered Jerusalem. He says, to the side there is the altar where Abraham was going to offer up Isaac. Remember we saw that sacrifice of Isaac earlier, where Melchizedek made his sacrifice. And then it says, on that altar, which is the Abraham altar, is a crack. When you put your ear on it, you hear the sound of running water. If you toss an apple into it or anything which will float, and you go to the spring of Siloam, you will see it there. Between Siloam and Golgotha, I think there's about a mile. Jerusalem has no water source apart from the Siloam spring. So I found this, this is from Charles Warren. They did a survey on behalf of Queen Victoria, I think in 1864. I think she sent them there to see if they could find some treasures under the Temple Mount. And we got this information here. And they confirm, I won't go through all of it, you can read it yourselves, but basically they've said that there was a hole which has been cut through the upper surface of the rock. That's where the Abraham altar is. And the hole is supposed to have been made for the purpose of carrying off the blood of the animals sacrificed on the rock when it was the altar of burnt offerings. The Mohammedans venerate this rock as the spot from which, according to their belief, their prophet ascended to heaven. Now, what's interesting is they have found various shafts down below the Temple Mount. There is a shaft called the Warren Shaft, for example. I don't know what to make of the pilgrims' account of listening to the water, but it's possible that that was either just a yarn or actually an objective fact that you actually can hear the water underneath. If that's true, then Zimzum would fit that location. That crack in the rock could be referred to as a Zimzum. You're listening to the water underneath, Zimzum.
Now, let me just say one more thing, Mel. You just made a statement that is interesting. It says the Mohammedans venerate this rock as the spot from which, according to their belief, their prophet ascended to heaven. Now, why in the world the God of Islam would take Muhammad all the way from Mecca to Jerusalem to allow him to ascend from there to heaven? What does that say about Jerusalem now in light of what we're saying? It seemed like somebody invented this idea that since now we want Mecca to be prominent, let's say he was, the Isra took place, the journey to Jerusalem, and the ascension took place from Jerusalem. Couldn't Allah just allow him to ascend from Mecca, the earliest city in the whole world, the place where Adam and Eve met and Abraham went, and the list can go on and on and on? Do you see the irony now, folks, in all of that? How somehow you interject things about Islam just to accommodate something related to the origin of the whole story. Yeah, keep going.
I just tell you something about myself. When I was a teenager, I worked in a lamb factory, and my job was actually pushing the blood down the hole. And it's actually interesting because they had holes in the Temple Mount for that very purpose, because if you can imagine 1 million people all looking to sacrifice their sheep at Passover, that's a lot of blood that needs to be drained down into the underground drains. So these holes are very significant.
The sound, Zimzum, the sound that he's saying, Zimzum. So it's the name, it's the word of the sound itself is what you're saying.
Right.
Yeah. And so if you go down underground, underneath the Temple Mount, you'll actually, there's two passageways. There's a walking passageway, and there's also a drainage point where the water flows, and it goes where? Goes all the way to the well of Siloam, which is obviously very famous. During the Festival of Tabernacles, the Hag HaSukkot, the ceremony of the drawing of the water occurred from the pool of Siloam. During the singing of the designated psalms, the Jews joined in with responses offering their hallelujahs, their hosannas, and the messianic greeting. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Does that ring a bell? Blessed is he. Sounds very like the praised one.
The praised one, you're right.
At this ceremony, Jesus had said, if anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. The pouring out of the water in the ceremony was looking forward to the time when God would pour out the Holy Spirit upon the nations. So this, both for Christians and for Jews, is one of the most holy places on the planet. Now, if we look at that then there, this was also a place where Jesus healed another blind man. If we look at where the Kidron Valley is, the Hinnom Valley, which is mentioned 101 times in the Quran, and look where the intersection is, it's at the pool of Siloam. So it's obviously very important. According to the Jerusalem Talmud, the pool of Siloam was the starting point for pilgrims who made the annual pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and where they ascended by foot to the inner court of the Temple Mount to bring their sacrificial offerings. So I believe that this is where Abdul Malik's Hajj started. They went up the Temple Mount on the steps that were there. There was a lot of rubble at that time. It would have been quite dangerous, I'd imagine. And then they crossed through the valley, the apocalyptic valley of Kedron, and then they went to Mount Safa. So we can see now how Marwa and Safa somehow became linked to Hagar's search for water because of that connection there with the pool of Siloam. and the tradition was set. And what's interesting is John of Damascus in the 630s seems to suggest that they have moved this location somewhere else.
Can I suggest that that's 730s?
It should actually, yes, 730s, you're correct, yeah, my mistake. But he says, the scripture says that there was a mountain like a grove and wood from which also Abraham cut for the whole burnt offering on which he laid Isaac, and that he left the donkeys with the servants. Therefore, from what source is your foolish saying? For there is no wood of a forest lying in that place, nor traveling by donkeys. So what he's saying is, this new place where they're having their Hajj, there isn't a place where you can get wood, and there is no traveling with donkeys there. So it's obviously a place that you would bring a camel, but not a donkey. So what does that sound to you like? It sounds to me very much like the Mecca of the Hijaz. And John of Damascus is mocking this new location. You can clearly see from Scripture that it does not match up with Scripture.
Which also suggests that by 730s, at that time, Mecca was a place that he is referring to. And that's why we can now start dating when Mecca was finally introduced.
Yeah. So I think we're talking, I'd say sometime between 700 and the 730s.
And remember when we talked about the inscriptions, Mel? What did we find out with the inscriptions from Lindstadt's, all of his research? That whole idea of Mecca and the Hajj is now being introduced on the script in the inscriptions, on the rock inscriptions around 720s to 730s. So it fits all of the rock inscriptions.
Well, absolutely.
Mel, we have about 2 minutes left if you want to wrap
okay,
up
perfect.
Point. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have this lovely little quotation. It says that Caliph Mansur started developing Mecca in 754. So he basically, it says he enlarged and decorated this, and this comes from the Kitab Akbar Makkah, which was written, if I can remember, 865, so about 110 years later. So that's interesting. And I think this is very cynical. One of the inscriptions that they had placed there is, the first house appointed to me was the one at Baca. How cynical can you get? If they're building Mecca for the first time, to suggest that this was the first house appointed to me was the one at Baca, that's incredibly misleading, I would suggest.
Right.
And then what's also interesting is, under Caliph Mansur, he built a new city, which is interesting, 762, the Medinat al-Salam, the city of peace, which is remarkably similar in meaning to Jerusalem, which is city of peace or town of peace. So it looks to me that Caliph Mansur was trying to replace the old Jerusalem with a new Jerusalem, and the old masjid with a new masjid. That's what I would suggest. And there we leave it.
Well, that's fascinating, brother. It's amazing. Thank you so much, of course, for doing all of this. Hopefully, next time we have you, either you have additional info or at least maybe new discoveries. But Jay, I'll give you like a few minutes, a few seconds, I should say, to just capitalize on what Mel have just mentioned.
Well, we've looked at the Masjid Al Haram, we looked at the Safa and Marwa, we looked at the Zamzam well. Almost everything that Mel has introduced is the first time we're hearing this. Now, because of that, we need to unpack it more. This is the first time we're hearing it, Mel, where all of us are kind of a little bit gobsmacked. We're taken aback. We need to now unpack it more. We'll bring you on board, and what we'll do is we'll unpack it much more slowly. We'll look at more maps. We'll look at also more timeline. We need to put this on a timeline, because there are so many dates that's coming out. Mel, you've done an amazing job. God bless you for that. Now, let us make sure that everybody understands it. But I hope for the Muslims that are watching it, can you see, this is yet another example of when you look at the artifacts, when you look at the documents, when you go to the maps of that time period, and when you look at the timelines, in every case, what Mel is finding, it shuts down the standard Islamic narrative.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to both of you. And thank you to those who are watching this live stream. Stay with us, because we'll close right now and take some of your questions if you have any. And to those who are listening to this live podcast, hopefully you've enjoyed these two parts of Let Us Reason, discussing yet another debacle in relationship to the historicity of Islam and the origin of many of its components. Thank you so much to both of you for being here. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Jay. Thank you to everyone who's watching. God bless you. This is Al Fadi, And we will be, of course, continuing next week with additional topics and other podcasts as well. If you are in studio with us watching this live stream live, please stay with us. We will take some of your questions. God bless. All right, folks. So let's see if we have any worthy comments. And Muhammad Malik, you said you are scholars. Thank you. We appreciate that. It is only fair to invite men like Dr. Zakir Naik. Here's what I'm going to correct you. If we're scholars, we're not going to lower ourselves to the basically the level of a thief and a liar. So find us somebody who will be willing to debate and willing to engage with us, and somebody who is Arab, by the way, because none of these men that likes to talk to us know Arabic. Arabic is not even their native tongue. So with that in mind, I'll be more than happy, me and Jay, to take on anyone who is willing to come and discuss things like this with us.
Can I say one more thing also?
They have to be worthy scholars.
One of the things, Muhammad Malik, is every time that you guys suggest people to come and talk to us, when they start opening their mouths, they just start quoting 9th and 10th century material. That's the same thing that you can do, Muhammad. You have no idea of what we're talking about. You have no idea of anything that we're referring to because none of you have gone to the 7th century. Have you noticed? We keep on insisting, would you please stop wasting our time with 9th and 10th century? What does Zakir Naik know outside of the traditions? He's never studied this. Why should we talk to him? We want someone who has actually done this kind of research. We want our Muslims like Dr. Zakir Naik to start supporting what they're saying from the century that Muhammad lived and from the area that Muhammad lived. Come on, we're still waiting for it, and we haven't found any of you who are able to do that. Again, so why should we even put that forward until you can prove to us that you have the evidence at hand? Show us the evidence, and then we can have a debate.
So I'm not really so sure. I don't see any additional comments. I don't know if the live stream is still going or not, but it seemed like the comments have stopped. So if anyone have any questions, by all means, go ahead and send them to us right now while we have still Brother Mill with us, if you have any specific question for him, of course. And I remember looking to see if there were any questions that I might have missed. So if there is any, let me know, point them out to me. Otherwise, this is basically yet another bombshell in relationship to the idea that Islam originated in the 7th century, that it originated from a prominent city known as Mecca, that there was a man known by Muhammad who was a prophet in there, that there is a scripture called the Quran that was revealed during his lifetime between 610 and 632, and the list can go on and on and on, yet everything so far that we are coming across as factual evidence contradict all of this, Jay.
That's why it's so good that it's made our job so much easier. And Mel, haven't you found this? One of the things that we have said, Mel, in all of our talks back and forth on both on Fanderfilm and on Siddha International, is that so many of us, we are so many more people who are working on this now. When Patricia Corona and when Michael Cook were introducing it in Hagerism back in 1977, and then when she wrote her book 1987 called Meccan Trade, she really only had herself and Michael Cook. That's all they had. They only had two who were not putting their heads together, and look at all the flack they got. Enormous amount of flack. We can count about 30 or 40 people that are helping us. You've got an amazing team, Mel, that's working around you. And these are people who are not just in one area, they're in many different areas with many different expertise, who are looking at coins, who are looking at inscriptions, who are looking at manuscripts. In your case, you're looking at some of the artifacts, and certainly many of the writings that Robert Hoyland really introduced to you in his book, which is a landmark book. Speak to that for a little bit, Mel, because this is something that a lot of people don't realize, where you're going and where you're finding it and who are the people you're using in your research.
Yeah, I would say it's a really exciting time because there are literally not just, I wouldn't say even 40 or 50, there are now hundreds and hundreds of people doing research. They're watching your videos, Jay, they're watching your videos, Al-Fadi, and my videos, and they're making contributions all the time, and they're doing their own research. They're directing me to books and papers and so on. So it's really exciting. And I would say that it's like a swarm intelligence that's going on. We've got hundreds of brains all working at the one problem, trying to solve the issue.
Yeah.
So a number of the people that are currently I'm getting a lot of ideas from would be Paul Ellis, who I've mentioned. Paul Ellis is working on an analysis of the Quran. due to publish a book later this year, which I highly recommend people look out for. I'm sure he will appear on your channels at some stage in the near future.
I'm in contact with him. We're also actually we're going to have a period together probably in about a week or two where he's going to bring him onto our channel. I know you're going to talk with him.
Yeah. What kind of analysis is he doing, by the way? And I have at least 2 questions for both of you that are on the screen. But what kind of analysis is he doing? Is it in relationship to the manuscripts or something else?
It's mostly source criticism. He's looking at where the different parts of the Quran are coming from.
Oh, that's excellent. Excellent.
So he's looking at the themes. He's looking at the context and lots of things like that.
I would love to have him on the show.
Apparently, it's quite a tome. It's quite a long book. He's put years of work into it. So a lot of the early material on this presentation came from him, and I was able to use it through his kind permission. Another person I would like to give a shout out to is Odin Lafontaine, who has done excellent work at unpacking who were the people behind the Quran. Where did it come from? So we're under the impression that there were correspondences happening in the early part of the 7th century, but it's only really with Abd al-Malik that it's all put together. A new spin is put on it, a new story around it, which is completely fake. And then it's introduced to the world as a Quran. So he's got some
Does he have any
ideas.
research papers out there or book or anything like that?
He has a book called The Great Secret of Islam. He's currently working on an English translation.
Okay.
And it will be out by the end of June. And it will be free for anyone to download. So I highly recommend
he has his own
checking him
YouTube
out.
site as well. You
Very
can go
good,
right on
very
to
good.
put his name up there.
Yeah. So can you guys take the questions at the moment?
Yeah, I just want to look at the second question from Daila Akhtar. This is a good question, actually, and it's one that comes up over and over again. And Mel, you can jump in. I'll go first, answer it first, and then you can jump on after me. Dr. J. Smith, research about Islam and Muhammad. He goes, my question is this. How can you explain the Karbala history of Shahad and Imam Hassan and Hussein? Basically, what he's saying is
the Shia Islam.
The Shiite Islam, the Sunni Islam. How you can explain the enormous amount of material that impacts both Sunni and Shia. And this is the way I answer that. It's very simple. Look and see what the Sunni-Shia problem is. It's not theological. It has nothing to do with theology. It's not even historical. It has to do with politics. Who carries the mantle of the prophet? Yeah. Once you have the mantle in place, you can see that this is an 8th century problem. And in the 8th century, they're going to say, well, then who is the one that actually takes and carries the authority of the state? The authority of the state is absolutely is impinging, and it's probably something that is happening in the Abbasid period. And you have one group that say it must come from the line of the prophet, and another group says no, it must come through ulema, those who are the scholars. We are part of the ulema, and you can see the Sunnis on one side against the Shiites, who then create a rift. Because stop and think yourself, this rift is still continuing even up to date. Right. Where does this authority come from? And it's absolutely important who wins out on that debate, because depending on who does win out on the debate, then that's where the caliphs come from. And so you can see that this is not just unique to the Sunni Shiite divide. This happens right down through history in almost every culture. You have this same type of context. Now, what is it you do with that? Well, it's already starting in the 8th century. I would suggest that Ibn Ishaq probably referred to this and introduced it and maybe even gave the names to it. By the time Ibn Hisham then is given a commission to write down the history of this man Muhammad, they have got to solidify that, and that's why he is the one that is given the responsibility after Muhammad dies to then talk about his after Ali. You have to bring in Hussein, then you have to bring in Karbala, and that's where the historical context is then introduced. But that is not till the 9th century that it's introduced to explain this real problem concerning who is going to carry that mantle. Now, who won that battle? Well, it's obviously the Sunnis have won it, because the Sunnis are now 90% of all Muslims. Only 10% are those who still believe it must be from Muhammad's own family. And those are the Shiites who are, look and see where they're all located today. They're all located in the very same place where this whole discussion began. They're located in Iraq and Iran. That's where the discussion began. It's still there, and it still continues. And that's why this competition that's been going on for not 1,400 years, for only 1,300 years, makes sense when you look at it historically.
Yes, sir. That's great assessment. The second one is really...
Did you want to jump on that, Mel, and say anything?
No, I think you've pretty much covered it. That's an area I still have a lot of research to do on that. It's still an open question for me, so I don't know.
Yeah, I'm gonna just allude to the second one. I thought it was a question. As apparently somebody says they have photos relating to the mission that we're doing, and they want to send it to us. For me, you can send it through my website, sierrainternational.com. What about you, Jay?
No, I'll send it to you. Because
Okay,
right
send
now
it to me
we're
through
getting
sierrainternational.com,
just
and
to
I'll
say,
forward to them.
Fander, the website Fander is about ready to go public. Once we are ready to go public, then you can start getting contact with us, and you can also send material to us. But until it does, I don't want to put it out there.
Send it to me, and I'll forward to these two gentlemen. So here's my question, Mel. So somebody might come back and say, well, wait a minute. I mean, Dan Gibson the other day said Safa and Marwa are in Petra, and now you're telling me it is in Jerusalem. And, as a Muslim, I will tell you, the Muslim will say, well, no, it's actually in Mecca. So how do you reconcile just a shift between Jerusalem and Petra, for instance?
The way I would answer that is that I'm essentially starting from scratch. I'm taking my own hypothesis, looking at the evidence. I'm not trying to scaffold it on other pre-existing hypotheses. And what we might find is there's a link between it and Petra. At this stage, I don't know. I don't know how it fits in.
Can I answer that?
Perhaps Petra may be a stepping stone from Jerusalem to Mecca. That's a possibility. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Dan's right. I have no idea at this stage. It'll require more research and discussion around the key bits of data.
Okay, let me throw this back at you, Mel, and see what you think. All the stuff that you've just been showing us for the last hour, what were the dates of all those maps, all those inscriptions? What dates are they? Of Safa and Marwa and Mount Moriah.
Safa and Marwa, they are 2,000 years old and older. So
okay. So what comes first?
Everything.
Everything comes first. Jerusalem comes first. Am I correct?
Jerusalem.
And what happens
absolutely.
in 70 AD in Jerusalem? It's destroyed.
But that was the destruction. Yeah.
So what happened to the Jews and the Christians? They flee. They go into the diaspora. Where do some of them go to? Some of them actually go down to possibly Petra. So what do you do when you go? You recreate that which you've already come from, right? You take it with you, do you not? And you create a new Safa and a new Marwa, and you create a Kidron Valley. You create what you already know. You have the Zamzam water well. Well, you can recreate that, and you do that. So I would suggest that what you're going to find out is everything we see in Petra is nothing more than a recreation of what was already in Jerusalem, which has now been destroyed. Now then, Petra gets destroyed in 713, and we know that it's also destroyed in 686 by Zubair, who destroys it. And what do? You take everything that you have known in Petra, and then you create it down in Mecca. So you're looking at a succession of two different destructions, and try and make sure and keep that which is familiar. Trying to take sure that which you as part of your worship structure. So it doesn't surprise me that what you're finding is probably the original Safa and Marwa, the original Zamzam well. And we have yet to talk about the Black Rock. Look and see whether that is yet. We haven't even brought that into you. When you start looking at the Black Rock, it all also follows the exact same route, but that's yet to come.
Yep,
I think there was probably a competition between both sides there, and probably the Black Rock was the alternative rock to the Rock of Abraham, which is found in Jerusalem, I would suggest.
Bingo there. Yeah. Here we go again. So again, almost everything that we're finding looks like it follows a succession. And that's why for Muslims, for those of us, we need to start putting timelines out. We need to see where this movement goes. And it stands to reason that anytime that which you have worshipped, that which is familiar, especially the Black Rock, because that's where God's presence is. When the Black Rock moves, God's presence moves with him. If you're going to move God's presence with him, you also got to keep all the foundations of the worship context. That means you've got to take all the rituals with him. So the rituals follow the Black Rock. The rituals then go from Jerusalem to Petra, then down to Mecca. They just keep on coming. In one case, southeast, and in the other case, way down south.
Yep. Well, that's wonderful, gentlemen. We have more recording to do, me and Dr. J, so we have to basically end this live stream. It's exciting, as always, to have you, Brother Mel. Of course, we will have you even join us again. I have yet to do a live stream with you from my remote or satellite studio, so we will try to do that pretty soon here. And Dr. J, any last words you want to share about whether this topic or anything else.
I'm going to end up with Muhammad Malik and his phrase that he says there. It's amazing that your followers believe you. He puts it as a question mark. Why do you think so many people are believing and coming on board? It's not because we're just making it up. What Mel has done today, looking at Safa and Marwa, looking at the Kidron Valley, looking also at the Zamzam well, looking at almost everything that he has put together, is based on evidence. We're not asking people to believe us. We're just saying follow the evidence. And wherever the evidence goes, we go with it.
Yep. There is something called cranium, by the way, and people tend to use it periodically. So we're so thankful that many of them are actually doing the homework, and they are following us because they believe in the data, not believe in what we say at all. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us. Hope to see you soon. From our satellite studio with more live streams with Sam Shamoun and others. And we thank you, of course, for your partnership with us. We encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channels, Fonder Films, Sierra International. Mel, do you have your own YouTube channel?
Sneakers Corner.
Sneakers Corner.
There you go. Sneakers Corner. Please do so as well. Support all of us if the Lord puts it in your heart through Patreon, PayPal, or whatever mean you want to do so. Pray for us all. We need all the prayers that we can get from you. This is Al Fadi, over and out. And yes, I did steal it from Jay. God bless you.
Deep roots. Hey, listen, I just wanted, before you go, Mel, what's this whole problem with you and Red